All right, this is a Fox News alert. You are looking at live pictures out of Key West where you can see the conditions have already started to deteriorate. We heard from Governor Rick Scott just about 2 hours ago, and he said the storm is here, and he is right. The storm now a Category 3, if I'm not mistaken. They expect the storm to strengthen before it makes landfall in the United States, which could happen between now and tomorrow. We heard from the mayor of Miami Beach, who said just because you're on the East Coast does not mean that you need to be complacent at this time.
Live pictures from Miami Beach where the wind is picking up. The hurricane heading off the coast of Cuba, gaining strength in those warm waters, the straits there between Key West and Cuba. The 1400 Eastern update from the National Hurricane Center in Miami.
Mike Brennan at the National Hurricane Center with your 2 p.m. Eastern Time update on Hurricane Irma. Irma right now is emerging off the north coast of Cuba. It's currently centered about 145 miles to the southeast of Key West, moving just north of due west at about 9 miles per hour. We can see the eye of Irma on the radar from Key West emerging off the coast. Rain bands are still moving across the Florida Keys and over much of South Florida, bringing tropical storm force wind gusts to the region. During the next 24 hours, we expect Irma to turn northwestward and north-northwestward and move across the Florida Keys and then right along the west coast of the Florida Peninsula, reaching the Fort Myers area around Sunday evening, passing by the Tampa Bay area and moving up to North Florida by Monday morning, and then weakening as it moves inland across southeastern Georgia to a tropical storm and finally to a tropical depression over the Tennessee Valley and southern Appalachians by the middle of the week. Florida, much of the state of Florida is under a hurricane warning, both coasts from the east coast all the way from the Georgia border southward and up from the Big Bend southward, including the Florida Keys. We're especially concerned about the west coast and southwest Florida, seeing the direct impacts of a major hurricane of the core moving across those regions as we go from Sunday into Monday. We're also very concerned about storm surge. There's a storm surge warning in effect for much of the Florida coast. In particular, we're worried about the life-threatening catastrophic storm surge from Cape Sable to Captiva of 10 to 15 feet of storm surge in this region. This area in southwest Florida is particularly vulnerable to storm surge. If you live in an evacuation zone in Lee or Collier County, or even all the way up through Cape Coral and into the St. Petersburg, Tampa Bay area, and you've been asked by your local emergency officials to evacuate, please follow that advice. You still have some time in those areas, as tropical storm force winds will not begin till later tonight in the Fort Myers area northward. In terms of storm surge elsewhere, we're expecting 5 to 10 feet of storm surge in the Florida Keys and extreme southeastern Florida, including the west side of Biscayne Bay. We're also expecting storm surge all the way up the east coast of Florida as well, life-threatening surge. So please heed any evacuation orders you've been given. In terms of rainfall, we're expecting widespread heavy rain across much of Florida. We could see 8 to 15 inches across much of the peninsula and southeastern Georgia, with isolated totals as high as 20 inches, and even higher totals in the Keys, 10 to 20 inches, isolated amounts as high as 25. And some of this rainfall will linger into the early portions of next week, and then we'll also expect to see heavy rains up into Georgia and into the southern Appalachians. This is Mike Brennan at the National Hurricane Center with your 2 p.m. update on Hurricane Irma.
All right, as you heard there, Mike Brennan from the National Hurricane Service giving us an update where we know the storm is now moving around 9 miles per hour, heading in a northwesterly direction. He said the eye is emerging off the coast and getting into some warm waters there, as they expect a direct impact at the Florida Keys, if I'm not mistaken, into tomorrow morning. He said there are life-threatening conditions along much of southwest Florida. I want to bring in Adam Housley. He is one of our correspondents, and he is down in Key Largo. Adam, what can you tell us? Are the conditions getting worse?
Yeah, Elizabeth, they've gotten significantly worse the last 3 hours. Power went out here locally around 10:30 in the morning. I have my wind meter out right now. We've been monitoring it the last 25-30 minutes here. We're on the ocean side of Key Largo towards the south. We're about 55 miles south and west of Miami if you were to go that direction. Right now, sustained winds here, 30 to 35 miles an hour. We're getting gusts higher than that. We're, again, on the ocean side. Over on the bay side, this area of Key Largo, very narrow, maybe a mile wide at the most. On the bay side, we found a couple of different hotels, local hotels, where people decided to ride out the storm here. Some people said they had really no choice. They tried to find flights. They tried to drive north. Didn't work, and they found the best place they could and high enough, they believe, to avoid any storm surge. Take a listen.
Well, we couldn't get out. Our flights were canceled. We got stuck. We'd be stuck in Fort Lauderdale. It wasn't worth it. And where can you drive? You can't drive anywhere. So we're here.
All right, back here live. Again, we're on the ocean side of Key Largo. You can see this area, the storm surge is already coming in. The water's lapped over several of the docks here are already underwater. You can see some of the boats out here just being smashed together and the water coming over some of the jetties if you go out a little bit further. And we're going to walk in this direction. The water was up a little bit higher here a moment ago. It goes and comes, which is normal for a storm surge and when you have this kind of hurricane coming ashore. Again, we're still hours away from the eye to cross the Keys. If I come over this direction, this restaurant here to my left is already underwater, about 2.5 to 3 feet of water. Now it's in a low area, but it's also underwater. The water again is all the way almost to the top over here. Once it goes over the top, it'll come into the parking lots. And if you look out to my right, this direction, you can see the wind. Again, about 30 miles an hour sustained, according to my wind meter. You can see the boats being tossed around. If this thing gets significant and the eye wall does stay as close as it says it's going to our area of Key Largo, some of these boats are going to break loose, and that's been the worry for people along the coastline. And when they break loose, they come ashore, and they can even cause more damage. So, guys, as you can tell, the conditions here are worsening. Again, about the last 3 or 4 hours here in Key Largo, it got significantly worse. Power is out throughout Key Largo. We're told it's on and spotty in some places. There is still cell service here as of this hour, but this thing's coming ashore, and people here who have decided to stay have hunkered down. And as we reported yesterday, not nearly as many people stayed here for this storm as did for Hurricane Andrew 25 years ago, and even for more recent hurricanes. They saw the video and the pictures coming out of the Caribbean, and they said, you know what, this storm is flattening some of those islands. We don't want to take a risk. And we met a bunch of people that drove north a couple of days ago, decided not to stay. We know a couple of them had to actually evacuate a second time as this hurricane continues to trend a little bit to the west. But when we got here, guys, on Wednesday, we were going to be on the backside, which is the better side of the hurricane. We're now going to be on the actual east side, which is the worst side, the dirty side, they call it. And that stuff is already coming our way, as you can tell.
Yeah, Adam, it's unbelievable to see those conditions start to deteriorate, and it's only 2 p.m. on Saturday. I mean, we can expect much worse. So we'll be thinking of you. We'll check in with you later in the show, and of course, please be safe.
Will do, guys.
Thank you.
And let's travel up the west coast of Florida to where we find Matt Finn near Tampa. As we heard from the National Hurricane Center, Tampa now right in the bullseye. Matt, you covered Hurricane Harvey. And it is a drastic difference in what we are hearing from what we heard from Governor Abbott before Harvey and what we are hearing from Rick Scott before Hurricane Irma. Are people in Tampa heeding these warnings and taking this storm in a different way, shall we say, than they did Harvey?
Well, Leland, of course, there are people that are heeding the warnings, and there are large portions of Tampa that look like a ghost town. We are now in Ybor City, which is historically Tampa's party district. It's the Bourbon Street of Tampa, if you will, and there are just diehards here who say they are staying. And if you look up and down this street, you could see some people patching up or boarding up their businesses, but otherwise there are entire storefronts loaded with glass that are not boarded up. We just spoke to Tampa's fire chief. He says that Irma could be the hardest hurricane to hit Tampa in a generation. Here's more of what he had to say.
In my 35 years of disaster preparedness and emergency response, I have never seen a storm or a system that is of this magnitude and is operating under this velocity. Never in my 35 years. All of our special needs folk and our vulnerability population, they need to have evacuated already because they are looking at a very horrific condition.
Leland, we're in one of the watering holes here. Here are some diehards who say they're staying. Guys, tell us why you're deciding to stay.
I'm on standby for work for bridge inspection, so I have to go in right afterwards. So I'm hanging out and waiting for it.
Tell us why you're staying.
Yeah, we actually thought it was going to come across the other side, so we weren't going to leave. Yesterday we found out it was going to come on this side, and we're Florida fierce. We're not leaving. That's the way it's going to be.
Ma'am, tell us why you decided to stay.
We are staying because we have a good place to stay, and we're not afraid of the hurricane. Honestly.
We wish you guys well. So, Leland, straight from the horse's mouth, people in Florida who are deciding to hunker down and try to survive Irma. Back to you.
Matt, we understand the fellow who says he's got to work, and obviously bridge inspections is an important thing. But for people who don't have a reason like that, if you have a second, ask them, what do they say to the first responders who are going to have to risk their lives if something bad happens to these people and they didn't heed the warnings? Are they saying them staying and being Florida fierce is more important than the fire chief saying, I don't want to risk my firefighters' lives?
Guys, what do you say to being Florida fierce versus firefighters who say they may have to risk their lives to rescue people who want to stay here?
This state, the leadership of the state has done a real great job. Governor Scott, FEMA, all that has really done a really good job. For those, and this is coming from me personally, for those of you that have decided to stay like me, be safe. Don't do anything stupid. Stay home. And just take care of your family, and that's it.
So you don't plan on calling a firefighter or anybody to rescue you?
You know, if I have to, I will, but that's going to be the last resort. I'm ex-military, so I can take care of myself. I'm pretty much going to do that.
We wish you well.
Thank you. You guys be safe, too.
Thank you. Thank you. Leland, back to you.
Well, if only people heeded that warning to stay safe and be smart in storms, I'd say the firefighters would have a lot less dangerous work during them. Matt Finn, we appreciate your time, your reporting. We'll check in with you, my friend.
Sure.
Liz?
Well, federal first responders say they are staged and ready to assist their local and state partners. Our own Garrett Tenney is at the Federal Emergency Management Agency headquarters, FEMA headquarters, with much more on the preparations taking place there. Garrett, what is taking place right now, hours ahead of landfall?
Well, Liz, what we're hearing from officials from top to bottom over and over is for folks to get out now before it's too late, because this storm is not one to mess with. And their top priority right now is protecting and preserving life. One glaring example of how bad they're expecting this storm to be is that the U.S. Coast Guard, which is tasked with protecting our nation's coastline, has evacuated its teams from southern Florida. And just a little while ago, I spoke to the commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard, who told me for those folks who don't evacuate, they might be on their own for a while until help can come.
When I look at the storm surge about ready to hit Key West and the Florida Keys, there's nothing heroic about sticking around. We'll do the heroic rescues, but bear in mind, it is going to take us hours and hours to arrive on scene because we don't have an air base that we can operate from with Hurricane Irma. We had one in Katrina. We had one in Harvey, but our only area to operate from with helicopters is going to be by sea.
And the commandant told me that they already have 40 ships there in the Gulf Coast that are prepared to come in behind the storm to begin to deploy those teams to do aerial surveillance to see where the damage is worst, where search and rescue teams need to be. And it's been a busy last week, couple weeks for the Coast Guard. Earlier this week, they took all of their resources, which had been in Texas working on search and rescue efforts after Harvey, and redeployed them to other areas across the southeast to be able to prepare to respond to this storm. And you can see here at FEMA's headquarters, there are more than 200 individuals, part of a massive response effort by the federal government from nearly every department and agency that are helping to coordinate what's expected to be a massive response after Irma. Liz.
All right, Garrett Tenney with the very latest with all those hardworking folks behind him. Garrett, thank you so much.
All right, let's bring in Florida Senator Bill Nelson, who is traveling around the state and meeting with local emergency officials. He is currently in Orlando. Senator, appreciate you being with us, sir. Give us the lay of the land. As you've been driving around Florida, we're looking at live pictures of Miami Beach where the storm has just sort of begun to set in. Do you have freedom of movement? Is there gasoline for people who still need to get out, or is everything deserted and locked down?
There's still gasoline, but now that the west coast of Florida, the Gulf Coast, has awakened to the fact that this is going to be a West Coast storm, not an East Coast storm, you're starting to see the evacuations coming from the West Coast getting away. And thus, I just came from the Tampa Emergency Operations Center. I-4, the interstate is getting heavy moving out of Tampa.
Well, you know, it's fascinating. We talked to a number of people, and our crews on the ground did, who had left Miami and left sort of southeast Florida and the Keys and headed northwest to Naples, to Fort Myers, up to Tampa. And now all of a sudden, rather than being a place of refuge, they're in a place that they need to evacuate from, and hotels are saying, you've got to get out. Live pictures from Key West right now, and it is already ominous there. No power, dark black clouds. What are you hearing from the National Guard and from the governor? Are they ready for this? Have they had enough time to shift the assets from the East Coast to the West Coast?
The short answer is yes. There's a seamless cooperation between all levels of government, and I think you're going to see that continue. But if it is a storm that gets back close to Category 5 hitting near Key West, there's going to be really some destruction there. Now, the good thing is that there are only about 10,000 people left in Monroe County. That is the Florida Keys.
Right.
What is happening now that the West Coast realizes it's going to be hitting there, and the possibility of the big disaster would be is if the eye of the hurricane moves off the coast in the Gulf of Mexico and parallels the coast.
Right.
All of those counterclockwise winds will drive